Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wholeness Campaign podcast. Again, it's your hosts, Selena and Eric Bando.
What's up?
And in this episode, we're really going to go into my story. I've shared this in the beginning of my YouTube journey. I think it's one of my first and second videos of going through just how I came to GAPS and how I've experienced a lot of physical healing through food. But I want to take time right now to kind of give a recap of that, maybe a little bit of a deeper dive into that and where my process has landed me as of today. I think I didn't give like the full, outline of it. So I want to share my journey, and Eric, as my husband, will be able to speak into it a lot more than in my other video because you were
Yeah,
really there for all of
I'll
it.
tell you all the secrets. I'll tell you all the things that
Yeah, all the things that
she hasn't told you guys yet. No.
So yeah, um, I think honestly, I think my healing process really started back when I just started changing my diet. I would say that was like one of the first parts. I would say like my wholeness journey started before then, but when I started really waking up to the fact that I needed like physical healing. So I'll focus more on physical healing and a little bit of like my emotional process on this, but when I really woke up to the physical health happened to be also around the time I was waking up to my need for emotional healing too.
Hmm.
It was around the time that I started seeing a counselor. I came back from a 6-month missions trip to New Zealand and then this remote island called Vanuatu, which probably nobody has ever heard of. But I was in that on those islands for 2 months, went back to New Zealand for a month, and then came back to the US and was really not wanting to come back to the US, but felt like God was leading me back to the US. Um, I've shared on here how I believe like God can be a huge part of your healing process, but for me, I felt like He was really leading me to go to school. So um, I came back, went to school despite not really wanting to go to school, and um, it was there that started realizing like really how unwell I was. Um, Not that this trip did all of that damage, but I did come back from those islands with uh, parasites and uh, just really, really intense level of like gut damage. I think I'd done some vaccines like on my way there. It just, all of it up until this point, I hadn't really had a standard for like what should I put in my body, like really vetting the things that I'm doing and researching. I just kind of was doing things to do them. And I would say like a little bit of myself felt like some of these things would be wrong, but I not enough to actually like make dramatic changes. And it wasn't really until I kind of slowed my pace of life down, coming back going to school, which actually was a very fast pace of life, but it was slower than it was more redundant than like the adventurous, like being in New Zealand and traveling. And I kind of like this, I get, a little bit of a high off of the adventure of it. It wasn't until it came back into this routine, a little bit more of the mundane, like school type life, that I felt like I started um, seeing the things that were going on in my own heart and also in my body, and having to kind of like own up to that. I actually remember these friends of mine in New Zealand were more in touch with my body than I was. So at the time, uh, I would share that that whatever I ate something that really upset my stomach, and I would feel like sick for days from eating that thing. And so then I'd go to eat that same thing again, and I'd have my friends like trying to stop me.
Mm.
Um, or they'd be like asking me after meals because they knew I was so reactive at the time to food that they'd be asking me like, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? And they were just like way more in touch than I was with my own body, because I was just kind of just suppressing it. And so again, like
Yeah.
there's something beautiful about the like mundane routine that has a way of like poking its finger at what's really going on and kind of forcing you to face the reality of where you're at.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I came back very sick. Um, I had been on like lots of antibiotics for malaria preemptively, because we were in a very high risk area, and then again we were drinking like really polluted water. So I have like a whole water video on my YouTube channel, and it comes from being like a little bit neurotic now about my water, because we just drank so much bad water that I came back really sick, and to the point where when I started to slow down and realized there was a problem, it got as bad as I would drink a sip of water in the cafeteria and I would have to run to the bathroom
Yeah.
because it was so like I was just reacting to everything. I'm like at the time I was like, okay, at the very least I'll cut dairy, I'll cut, you know, bread, I'll cut sugar, like sweets or some sweets. I wasn't really doing very much, but I was like, okay, let's try to cut things. And I was just like all over the place because you're eating cafeteria food at college and you have no idea what's in anything.
Yeah.
And I sip a drink of water and I'm reacting, but then I have coffee and I'm not reacting. So it's just like super confusing.
Well, I remember we would go out to eat, like we'd go on a date somewhere
Yeah.
out to eat. And I remember this one time we went out to eat at this steakhouse, and then afterwards, it was at Hugo's.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you were so out of it, and we're sitting on the bench outside the restaurant, and you were just like so out of it because when your gut is so out of balance,
Yeah.
the way you digest the food, it will affect your cognitive
Oh my
functions, your
gosh. Yeah.
brain. And it was almost like sometimes after you'd eat, you'd almost be like have these like symptoms like you were intoxicated or like you were dizzy or
Yeah.
you just felt like you had this brain fog. This it would affect your brain.
Right.
And I remember at that point, I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
I've never even seen this happen. I didn't even know that this was a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling so scared, just feeling like I didn't even know what to do. I was just holding your
Right.
hand. I was just holding you.
He would pray
I was praying, but
and
inside I was so
actually
scared.
and actually we would see like I felt like we prayed sometimes and like symptoms would go away. The interesting thing is like I wasn't ever like fully addressing the root cause, and so it eventually like came back. Not that prayer couldn't be permanent, but I don't know. What's interesting for me was I felt like there was a place of like owning up to what was actually going on, coming out of the denial, like facing it and doing something about it, being powerful, doing something different than what I had been doing. Um, which is a scary place because that requires you to really learn yourself. But yeah, I think not that I'm saying God didn't heal me from that because I was supposed to learn a lesson. I did a reel about that, and I don't believe that. But it's this idea that there was an invitation for me to grow in so many ways at this point in time. So I started kind of getting my feet wet, trying to avoid foods. It got to the point where I was reacting to literally everything. Um, and then it wasn't until I'm pretty sure, it wasn't until I got the series of concussions. This is like a huge part of the process too. Um, because the gut and the brain are so connected. So when I was in New Zealand, I did get one concussion, but it was pretty minor. I got like hit in the head like 4 times by a surfboard, and that was the end of my surfing journey. In case you're wondering, I
Short lived.
short lived, never surfed again. I'm not interested in it. But yeah, New Zealand's beautiful. I was trying to be adventurous, and I I got hit like literally 4 times in a row, and I'm like, I think this is not my sport. Um, so I had a headache for like several days after that, but then when I got here, what was the first one? Oh yeah, so I was at a trampoline park
Yeah.
um, one summer in college where I'm already dealing with all the gut damage. I've done so many rounds of antibiotics at this point from immune stuff as a kid. So I just really had a like weakened immune system, weakened
Yeah.
microbiome.
Your
I'll
gut
say
was
my
just
gut was
not.
just like not in a good place,
Yeah.
and then it just affects your brain.
Yeah.
So I'm just not great as it is, and then I get hit when I'm down. So um,
Yeah. And you got the parasite from the
yeah,
missions.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, but then I dealt with it conventionally, so I did
Yeah.
more rounds of antibiotics. There was just there's so much going on. Overall, just like microbiome damage. And I'm in a trampoline park, and I used to be a gymnast, so I thought that I could do a double front tuck into a foam pit, and I never was able to do that. I don't know why I tried doing that, but I landed on my head, which you're in a foam pit, so you think you'd be fine, but I like got pretty bad whiplash and it basically like tweaked my neck back pretty bad when I landed on it. And the crazy thing is concussions can take a couple weeks to set in. And so it took me 2 weeks before all of a sudden it just hit me. And by then I was back at school, and I'm enrolled in classes, and I all of a sudden am like sleeping like 15, 16 hours a day because my brain is like damaged. Like, and I went to a neurologist, a normal, conventional neurologist, and I feel like we could do a whole episode on concussions, but
Yeah.
they basically said it was a mild concussion, and did not feel mild because I was unable to do pretty much anything. Um, Actually, you took me to the hospital because I hadn't been to the hospital because 2 weeks in is when I started feeling the symptoms. And you ended up taking me to the hospital because I couldn't look at light. I had like a migraine that like didn't just was
Yeah. You were
chronically
having a
there,
really bad headache.
really
Yeah.
bad headaches. Um, I like my neck still was like injured at the time, but it wasn't, you know, that felt like it was dissipating, but it was like all these like really intense neural, I couldn't focus.
Yeah.
Um, my vision was bad. Like my vision was getting really bad. I remember like, yeah, I was not able, like I wasn't able to see the same way. I don't know what else. I feel like there were so many. Dizziness.
Yeah.
Oh, I was so dizzy. I was so dizzy. I was like up on a top bunk of my um in the dorm at the time, and I was like living on the top bunk, and I literally couldn't like get up the stairs safely.
Yeah.
I couldn't like climb up to my bed safely. Like so I just would stay in bed, and like I was texting you, but then our dorms have like these rules, so Eric can only come at certain times, and I'm like, we we eventually went to the hospital, and their response was, this is the best, that I should just take baby aspirin. We went through so many tests. I was like a CAT scan and this and that and this and that. And the truth is that modern medicine is meant for extreme emergencies. And I wasn't an extreme emergency.
Yeah.
Um, I was like mild, even though I was like so dizzy. I felt like I was going to pass out all the time. And I had these like really intense migraines. Um, so yeah, they gave me some pain medicine. They gave me some baby aspirin, and I went on my way. Um, yeah, it was that semester that I felt like I was actually, this is another kind of God moment that basically felt an invitation to step out of college, because at this point I couldn't do anything. I was so non-functional. Um, and actually take a break, go home and rest, and actually felt like I was supposed to go to this school. So ended up, which in a lot of ways was a great, amazing decision, and I loved it. I had a blast. And then in another whole set of ways, it left me again like really sick because I was in Israel, the Netherlands, and Madagascar for like it was 3 months ish, and yeah, Madagascar did a number on the gut again. I was healed by the time, like by the so after resting at my house, like I felt like I was able to actually get better. Some residual headaches, but I felt like I was able to get better, and part of that felt miraculous to me. And then when I went back, like I'm just rattling through things, but when I came back, I really came back even sicker digestive wise.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. What is your take on that time? I don't know if you remember.
Well, I don't know. I would love to hear more about like I think it's good to give them that background, you know what I mean, a little
Yeah.
bit, but like how did you find gaps then? It's
Yeah.
like knowing
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that background is good, like
Yes.
you struggled with the
Yeah.
concussions, all that kind of stuff. But then like how did that lead? Because that's kind of a cool story too, is
No, it
like
is a cool
how did
story.
that lead you to gaps into like where you are now?
Yeah. Yeah. So the crazy thing is I really feel like God has been a part of like my whole journey. So, whether he's like leading me to schools, even though the schools did some damage, like leading me to schools or leading me to like drop out and rest, or you know he's really been a part of this whole process. So at one point I got so sick and tired of being sick and tired that just um I just kind of like told God, I'm like, I need answers, like I need a way out. I'm okay if it means I need to do stuff. Like I need a way out. And um we were friends with a couple at the time that this was like, we met with them, I think literally 2 days after I prayed that. And they introduced me to the whole idea of the autoimmune protocol,
Hmm.
AIP, if you're familiar um, with that. It's this it's the whole idea of of food as medicine. And a lot of people have seen recovery from autoimmune conditions with this. I wasn't dealing with an autoimmune condition, but I felt like it was like good enough that
Yeah.
it would help. So I started like getting into the process of going towards that direction, and then actually as I started do like kind of doing it, I heard from another friend who was basically like, this is like 1 month into marriage, where she had a very similar situation to me, where she came back from overseas with really bad gut damage, parasites, all the things. And she was on GAPS, and I had never heard of GAPS. Um, but the more I did the research and kind of compared the two, GAPS really felt like it was what I needed, because I was like, I feel like I need more of like the gut healing, on the base level. Like now I understand what the
Yeah.
difference fully is, but for me, I was like, I really need to repair.
Yeah.
And
No, I remember. I think we talked to her before we were even married. I remember like we were gonna do AIP. We were
yeah,
kind of gearing up for AIP. And then we have this conversation with our friend. She tells us about gaps. I remember like we were going for a walk. It was a nice day outside. We're talking with her. She's kind of sharing. Well, actually, I think Val said,
yeah.
"Hey, you should."
So like a mentor of mine.
Yeah, a mentor of ours said, "Hey, you should talk to so and so. She
Yeah.
knows about this other protocol." It's almost like she had a sense like, "Hey, hey,
Yeah,
before you do that,
yeah,
hear
yeah,
this." And I remember when we were talking with her, kind of it was clicking, things were clicking in our head and we're like, at least for you, definitely at that time, like, "Oh, maybe this is the direction we should go." You were
yeah,
hearing her story, you were hearing her testimony with of what she was being healed from. She would eat food and she would feel intoxicated
she would
afterwards
get like
because
well, almost like drunk
yeah,
symptoms
because of the
because
way the yeast from the food was fermenting within her stomach or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah,
She would
that's yeast
feel,
overgrowth to the
yeah, she
max.
would feel like drunk. I had never heard of that before. And then you would have similar kind of symptoms and feelings of maybe not
Yeah.
being drunk, but feeling dizzy
Dizzy or, yep,
and fatigued and
really
brain fog.
fatigued.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, fatigue
So,
was the other thing. Um, yeah, no, and I was a little skeptical, I will say, because as much as it felt like a God journey, I was so sick of hearing about different diets. I mean, I was on Whole30 for a while because it felt like that would bring some relief. I went to a doctor and they were just like, throughout the IBS kind of flippantly, and which is like irritable bowel syndrome, which by the way is a symptom, not actually a diagnosis. And um they're just throwing that out, and then they were like, why don't you try low FODMAPs? And then I'm hearing my other friend saying AIP, which felt more hopeful because I kind of understood the real, like, what would actually be happening. But
yeah.
then hearing gaps, I'm like, how many more? Bring it on. I'm just like, which one's right?
Yeah.
And you know, and like the friend that introduced me to gaps, she said she had tried even more before
Oh,
she had
really?
tried gaps. She was
Yeah.
a vegan for a while. she
Oh, yeah.
she did a lot of different things. She did, yeah.
So you
um
start gaps. When did you start to think to yourself? You decide to start gaps. When did you really start to think to yourself, like, oh, this is the real deal? This is like working.
well, when I started, it was 2 weeks, it was like less than 2 weeks in, and I don't know how graphic I want to be here, but I had not had like a gut related flare in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that was unheard of for me. I would be happy if I made it through a meal. If I made it through a meal, I'd be like, okay, we're getting better. And then it would be so defeating when I like wouldn't.
Yeah.
This was like 2 weeks of, so we started full on. We started on intro, which if you know gaps, like it's very intense. Like you literally have to overhaul every single way you eat. And I did it like all in one, and we went to stage 1 because I was just like done. And I didn't know at the time that that's not really recommended, but I did it anyway, and I did feel so much relief. I don't think everybody would feel that level of relief because depending on the different symptoms you're dealing with, like you might need different things, and intro might not be the best place to start. But I was dealing with a lot of like diarrhea. I was dealing with a lot of like the residual from the parasite and still all those symptoms. Plus then I think I was so depleted of like minerals because of that. I was still fatigued from the concussions. I was still dizzy from them. Um, Come to learn, some of those concussion symptoms I think were also like they kind of like blended with like detox symptoms. So there was a lot kind of going on, but
Yeah.
at the end of it, I started, you know, I felt like the best I had felt in literally years after those 2 weeks. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is it. I kept saying, I'm like, this is it. This is for everybody. This is, I don't care what you're
Yeah.
dealing with.
When
Like,
you start to experience the healing for yourself,
yeah,
I think that is just needed
yeah,
because I mean, I remember like for me, when I first heard of it, I thought this is crazy.
yeah,
This is just so wild. But when I started seeing you experience healing, when I started seeing it,
yeah. It was so dramatic because I like went from not really being able to safely drive to like fully functioning,
yeah,
like really fast. Like, I'm not even saying it I don't even think most people's healing happens that fast, but for me it was so fast that it was kind of like you can't even, like, how do you argue with that?
yeah,
um yeah, so it, and then from there on, it's obviously a growth journey because I started out using like all the wrong types of filters, and we were making meat stock by just like throwing like a bunch of ground beef into
oh yeah,
like water. You're doing it all wrong, but the
you're doing
crazy
it.
thing was it was working.
It still works.
It worked when you're like completely messing it up.
Well, that's part of the process is doing it wrong at first and then learning as you go. And
Yeah.
that's how you get good at something. that's how you know so much now about gaps,
Yeah.
is because you did all the trial and error.
Yeah.
Not only did you do all the research and take courses and dive into learning and reading and
Right.
watching, but you also were doing it, and you were like trial and error, like, oh, this
Right.
works, this isn't working. And that's why I don't know, I would say that you know just as much as any as most gap
A
coaches
lot of the
or
GAPS coaches, it's
yeah.
interesting because there is all these certifications around it. But yeah, lived experience is powerful. And I've been working with some GAPS practitioners and really, really great GAPS practitioners that have given me some guidance where I've needed it. And I feel like um, it's just empowering when you hit the point where you felt so hopeless about your health journey that like it felt like everything you tried wasn't working and you had no idea where to go. Where do you turn when modern medicine is like not doing what it said it was going to do?
Yeah.
Where do you turn? Like, these are the professionals that are supposed to know more than you. And I have to like go scouring through Facebook forums and digging in the internet in areas where you're not even like Google won't even let you see some of these articles, and you got to find those articles because that's actually where your hope is. That's like where your healing is.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
it's crazy that for most of us it takes like a huge level of desperation
yeah.
to get to that level of, I mean, we were kind of talking about it last episode of just being sick and tired of being sick and tired. You get kind of desperate for answers, and then that desperation will lead you to really find answers.
Well, it's what's funny is I'm remembering when I started researching initially, I couldn't read for like almost a year. I couldn't read without getting a headache.
Yeah.
And so I remember when I got so sick and tired that I was like, I'm gonna I'm gonna read as much as I can. Like some of these Gabs books, they don't have like audio recordings
Like I
yet.
have to
And
read.
so I'm like, I would read a sentence and I would just like take a break and read another sentence and then take a break. Or I'd like listen to
Mhm.
videos and I couldn't watch the screens
That's
because the
good.
screens were so overstimulating.
Yeah.
Um, I would get a migraine if I went on a screen. And plus, I was trying to do school. And so my capacity was so much lower to learn about something else on the side. But I'm like, this is my life. Like, I can't do anything if I don't have my health.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't, it sounds pathetic. And obviously, but like,
No, but that's so cool. That's like symbolic because it's like no matter where you are on your healing journey, like with you, like yeah, you couldn't even read a page, you couldn't even watch a video, but you found a way. Like, hey, I'm just gonna read one sentence at a time. I'm
yeah.
just gonna watch 10 seconds at a time.
Or you buy the thing on Kindle and then you listen to the
Yeah,
terrible Kindle read aloud version that's like
yeah,
sounds like a complete robot. I think there's better stuff there now, but like at the time it felt like well, you'd have to research to find the other better things or you'd have to pay.
yeah,
And I was just like, I mean, I'm literally listening to these Kindle things that aren't even like pronouncing basic words right. But I'm desperate. And I
yeah.
think so that's where like what's interesting is your belief system has so much to do with it. And I really believed from the beginning, this is not to toot my own horn, but it's just to say that I wasn't dealing with like the feeling of chronic sickness for a long time. So I had recollection of feeling good. I knew it was possible to feel good again.
Yeah.
I think when people have been dealing, I have a lot of compassion for people who have been dealing with chronic illness for years and years because it's extremely challenging to like maintain healthy belief systems and maintain hope.
Yes.
I have so much compassion for people who have been there for way longer than I have. I've had chronic issues for a while, but I didn't feel like
It
chronically
wasn't like your
debilitated.
identity.
I wasn't debilitated too.
Yeah.
I would have these like symptoms, but I wasn't debilitated. So I believed that I could get better.
Yeah.
And it's like when your belief system is that there has to be a way. God did not put me on this earth for there to not be a way for me to feel better. Then like you find that way. You when you
Yes.
believe there's a way, you'll look for it. If you don't believe there's a way, you're not going to search. You're not going to go
Seriously,
searching.
you know,
You're not going to like,
because it's like,
what's the point?
what are you looking for though either? If
Exactly.
you don't think there's something out there,
Right.
or
Right.
if you think you,
Or even like the idea of me praying initially, like I prayed and I said, God, like, please, like, give me the way.
yeah,
I had to believe that there was a way for me to even be willing to pray a prayer like that.
hmm,
Like prayer in and of itself takes a level of hope.
yeah, faith,
You have to,
hope,
yeah,
yeah,
you have to have hope to even say something like that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so I don't know. I think I've come a long way. I'm definitely not even where I fully would like to be someday. We're still like mostly eating full gaps. I'm mostly eating full gaps. I could probably share more of like my pregnancy and breastfeeding and everything that happened like up until that point. But I will say, like, once I added in the detox support, that was huge. Once I actually saw a functional neurologist who helped me deal with some of the concussion symptoms. That took me like 50% of the way, and it was incredible, like in 2 weeks. So again, these things, it's funny, it didn't take very long for me, but I had been dealing with them for like a year and a half, 2 years of these like symptoms, and they were getting worse. So in some ways, some they were slightly getting better, but um yeah, so yeah, I feel like I could go deep into the
so yeah,
whole like uh you know, detox support, how that changed everything. I felt like eventually I hit a like a ceiling with gaps, and I realized I wasn't really doing any detox support. So I had to like really go in. And that's when I started doing coffee enemas every single day for like,
hmm,
almost a year and a half, and all that neuro rehab,
yeah,
which was like huge for me. Um, but those are such deep
yeah.
topics. I
We'll
feel like
save that.
we'll save it,
We'll
but
save that for
um,
another,
yeah,
because those are that could be a whole other,
and kind of summary is really your belief
yeah,
systems make a huge impact on your process, and don't go overseas if you don't want to. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah.
Uh,
Why
but
don't we close with one final question?
yeah,
How do you feel about that?
yeah. What's that?
What would you say has been one of your biggest challenges with gaps and all of this?
Yes, challenge. Um, I would say like finding the time, finding the money, but I feel like those are challenges. They're not like super big challenges. I think probably my biggest challenge. Um, hmm, oh, I feel like probably my biggest challenge is like you you don't really have a lot of people doing the same type of thing you're doing. When you choose to go on a diet like GAPS, you're pretty much choosing to be the black sheep like everywhere you go. Um, and that can be really triggering for me.
Yeah,
And you're choosing to say no to food from people. You're choosing to like act differently and maybe make some people feel weird or awkward around you. You're choosing to not really be able to go out to restaurants, to have to like re-explain and re-explain and re-explain to family, and you're having to choose like the harder, the slower. It feels like
yeah.
the, I mean, sometimes Gap's food just doesn't look as nice as like, especially for
As a
the honestly
burger,
most of the time we were on Gaps, had have been on Gaps. We are not very like we're not very intentional chefs. Neither one of us. I didn't really know what I was doing with cooking. He We cook extremely basic. We cook for the fast and the busy like lifestyles because that's kind of what we'd been dealing with for
yeah,
a while. And we're about to slow down here a little bit, but it's we've been cooking to make things as baseline as possible, things that don't taste or look even as good as you totally can make Gap's food taste amazing. We just didn't. And so I think the comparison is a struggle. The feeling left out is a struggle. The feeling like you have to speak up is a struggle. The feeling like you're yeah, like that black
yeah,
sheep amidst like a whole culture that really doesn't value
You're kind of going
your
against the
health.
grain. You're,
Me having to
yeah,
explain to people why I don't want like my food in plastic. And it just feels like weird to do that stuff, but I know how much my body's benefited from it, that it's
yeah,
felt worth it.
yeah.
Um, but I think it can be a very lonely thing, and finding community has been a process. I feel like I've had to kind of make it,
Yes.
um, and make everybody be on gaps with me, or or at least like be on a health journey, and then you kind of like have your people. But before that, it can be very lonely, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very relatable for probably a lot of people that are watching this or that have tried gaps or on some sort of healing wholeness journey with nutrition or just in general. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
cool. Thanks for sharing, baby.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, please like it and comment below if you have any gaps related stories, or if you're on your own healing journey with food or any kind of alternative medicine, what you have found helpful. Um, we would love to hear your whole process. That's going to be a part of the fun of this podcast, is getting to have people on and hear their healing stories, to hear and inspire, hopefully, some of you guys. So I will see you guys in the next video.
Peace
Peace
out.
out.